Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, Assalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Today I will be talking about scientists in Islam.
Yeah, exactly.
Nowadays, we don't really see any successful, educated, professional Muslims, and instead we see the non-Muslims being the high doctors and the high scientists of our society. But and we see the Muslims only thinking about luxury and not trying to seek knowledge. But the Prophet said, there is a hadith saying, narrated by Anas bin Malik, radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet said, seeking knowledge is mandatory for every Muslim. But instead, we see the non-Muslim people following this hadith instead of the Muslim people. Look around us, the skies, the water, the ground, and even in the Holy Book, Allah gives us signs. In the Surah Al-An'am, verse number 97, وَهُوَ الَّذِي جَعَلَ لَكُمُ النُّجُومَ لِتَهْتَدُوا بِهَا فِي ظُلُمَاتِ الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ قَدْ فَصَّلْنَا الْآيَاتِ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْلَمُونَ. This ayat means the ones that Allah gave us signs, and these signs will only be visible for the people that are wise. But there was once a time where Muslim people were the people of the golden people of their society, and were the high doctors and the big engineers and scientists. And they were dominating their society and not being discriminated like we are now. And these scientists should be role models for every one of us. So I'm going to start by talking about the first scientist that I found. His name is Al-Khawarizmi. He was born in 780. He was born in 780 and died in 850. He was the first one to discover algebra. He was the best mathematician of his age. Thanks to his book, Al-Kitab Al-Muqtasar fi Hisab Al-Jabbar Al-Mukazbala, a book showing how to solve equations and problems driving through ordinary life. This book was the first written text on this subject. Okay. This book was used for taxes, legacies, lawsuits, and in other cases of the measuring of lands, digging of canals, and geometrical computation. The second scientist I am going to talk about is Ibn Sina, also known as Avicenna. Avicenna was born in 980 and died in 137. He took all the medicine information from Greece to India and summarized it into one book, his book, The Canon of Medicine. His famous work were the Book of Hile, a vast philosophical and scientific encyclopedia, and The Canon of Medicine, which was a text of standard medical text at many medieval universities. The Canon of Medicine provides a complete system of medicine according to a principle of Galens, and it also talks about philosophy, astronomy, geology, Islamic theology, logic, mathematics, as well as poetry. He was regarded as the most influential polymath of the Islamic Golden Age. The third scientist that I'm going to talk about is Al-Battani. Al-Battani was born in 858 and died in 929. He was an Arab Muslim astronomer, astrologer, and mathematician. He was known for determining that there are 365 days, 5 hours, 46 minutes, and 24 seconds in a solar year. He was able to correct some of the Ptolemy's results and created his own sun and moon diagram. Some of his measurements were even more accurate than ones taken by Copernicus centuries later. The next scientist I'm going to talk about is Al-Zahrawi, who was the greatest surgeon of his time. Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi invented different created different tools for surgeries. He was a court physician for Andalusian Al-Hakam II. He devoted his whole entire life and genius to the advancement of medicine and surgery in particular. His best work was the Kitab al-Tasrif. Abu al-Qasim specialized in curing by cauterization. He invented several devices for surgery, for purposes such as inspection of the interior of the urethra, applying and removing foreign bodies from the throat, and inspection of the ear, etc. He also credited to be the first one to describe ectopic pregnancy in 963, in those days a fatal infliction. He also created a tool for cataract eye surgery and the first to illustrate the various cannulae and the first one to treat the wart with an iron tube and a caustic metal. The next scientist I'm going to talk about is Al-Bayruni. Al-Bayruni was born on 5th September 973 in Kaf and died on the 13th September 1048. He was well-versed physician, mathematician, and astronomer, and he was also a natural scientist, and distinguished himself as a historian, chronologist, and a linguist. He was the first one to combine geometry and algebra. He improved how to estimate the circumference of the world. 95 of his 146 books talk about astronomy and mathematics. The next scientist I'm going to talk about is Ibn Firnas, the first man to fly. He was born in 810 and died in 887. Abbas Abu al-Qasim Ibn Firnas Ibn Wirtas al-Takwaruni. He was the first one to made the first flight 1,000 years before the Wright brothers. We know the name of the Wright brothers, but not Ibn Firnas. He was an inventor, engineer, aviator, physician, and was also an Arabic language poet. The next scientist I'm going to talk about is Ibn Washiyah. Ibn Washiyah was born in the 9th century and died in the 10th century. He used to work on alchemy and chemistry and was the first historians to at least partly decipher the hieroglyphs by relating them to the Coptic language used by Coptic priests in his time. An Arabic manuscript of Ibn Washiyah's book, Kitab Shawq al-Mustahab, a work that discovers a number of ancient alphabets in which he deciphered a number of Egyptian letters. The next scientist I'm going to talk about is Abdul Malik. Abdul Malik was the great alchemist. He was born in 646 in Mecca and died in 705 and was the first Umayyad Khalif. He made alchemy easier and invented some of his own theories, and he taught this alchemy to different people. He was very good at coin making and metal forging. He built the Dome of Rock in Jerusalem, but was destroyed by the Abd al-Malik's army put down by the uprising. The next scientist I'm going to talk about is Ibn Zakaria. Ibn Zakaria was born in 865 and died in 925. He was a Persian Muslim polymath, a prominent figure in the Islamic Golden Age. He was a physician, alchemist, and chemist. He was the first one to differentiate smallpox and measles, and he discovered different compounds and chemicals such as alcohol and kerosene. He was also the first one to classify different elements in the periodic table. The next scientist I'm going to talk about is Al-Tusi. Al-Tusi was born in 1201 in Baghdad and died in 1274. He was a Persian polymath, a prolific writer, an architect, an astronomer, a biologist, chemist, and mathematician. His mathematics of astronomy is also considered the greatest of his time. He had a diagram in his book the same as Copernicus years before Copernicus released his book. Thank you for listening to my...
Jazakallah khair, Tadi. So